Hello and welcome to the Emerging Tech Horizons podcast. I'm Arun Serafin, Executive Director of NDIA's Emerging Technologies Institute. Today's guests are Rachel Hoff and Eric Snelgrove. Rachel is the Policy Director at the Ronald Reagan Institute, and she's a former speechwriter and policy advisor for Senator John McCain. And Eric is the CEO of Revere Federal Strategies and a former professional staff member at the House Armed Services Committee. Rachel and Eric are part of the team that just published the Reagan Institute's National Security Innovation-Based Report Card, which is an annual evaluation of how the U.S. national security ecosystem is faring based on a set of 10 very interesting key indicators and metrics. Today, we're going to talk about how they've graded different sectors of the defense innovation base and what that means for defense, national security, and innovation overall. This is the third time actually, we've gotten a chance to talk to Rachel and Eric about this report card. So welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So Rachel, to get started, I want to ask you to give us a little intro to the Reagan Institute, remind us what the Institute does and why it was established.
Sure. So the Reagan Institute is the Washington, D.C. office of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, which is headquartered in California at the Reagan Library. Most often, these presidential libraries really focus on preserving the history of the administration of that president. And by creating an institute here in Washington, the Reagan Foundation and Institute really wants to focus on today's problems and challenges. And so sometimes when we let people know and are briefing out on Capitol Hill or across government that we did a report card on emerging technology and innovation, folks wonder, maybe think like those weren't, when we think about quantum compute and AI and other emerging tech challenges we face today, those maybe weren't the same challenges of the 1980s. So why is the Reagan Institute doing this work? Our answer to that is simply that President Reagan was always a big champion, not only of peace through strength and a strong national defense, but in particular, understanding the value of science and technology, of research, of the private sector, and the value of America's dynamic and open private sector in leading the world in innovation, and that actually is a big part of our strategic advantage more broadly.
Yeah, I think people sometimes forget, right? If you think about what the Reagan administration did to the defense budget, increasing it significantly, but it was both on the research side and the procurement side. We were digging up some numbers previously and showed that the Reagan administration really increased even science and technology funding for the Department of Defense back then. And then if you further think about the big, hairy, audacious goals, which didn't always work out, but like Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, right? That because they're so technologically rich, right, and ambitious. And those are all the kinds of things that we're talking about today, let alone what you said, right? We're really trying to embrace the commercial sector more and integrate the commercial sector into our national security needs. Those are all echoes of things that would have been talked about during the Reagan administration, I think.
I think so too. And when we think about the context that President Reagan was leading our country through the Cold War, trying to outwin the Soviets, not just on the number of ships and tanks and planes and the number of men and women in our military, but that our technological advantage, that our superiority in that domain in particular, was a big part of how we were going to maintain our competitive edge. Those same issues, even though the world looks different today, are just as relevant, especially vis-a-vis the competition that we face with today's People's Republic of China. The ability to maintain and extend America's competitive edge in the national security domain remains incredibly important. And the kinds of things that we look at in this report card on emerging technology and innovation, funding for research and S&T, as you mentioned, remain really important to those endeavors, in addition to bringing the commercial sector more and more into this conversation as well.
And so the Reagan Institute does a lot of things, including the Great Reagan Forum out in California. And this scorecard, this report card is another example of one of your great projects. So let's dive into that for a second. I want to ask you what motivates then the creation of the report card, and how do you do it? How long did you produce it? What's the methodology? I love how data-based it all is.
Yeah, that's one of the goals with the report card is really to take a different approach than the many other experts and organizations who are focusing on this broad issue set. I think we do something a little bit different and hopefully value added to folks like yourself and your audience, which is break kind of this ecosystem, the national security innovation base, as we call it, kind of break it down into its component parts. What really matters? We have 10 key indicators that we look at. One new one this year, spoiler alert, I'm sure we'll get to that. And Eric can speak to some of our particular findings and recommendations that go into or come out of that data analysis that you mentioned. And actually grade where we are, where we're doing relatively well, where we're falling behind. And now that we're in the third year of the report card, as you mentioned, where the trend lines are going, where we're seeing all of the activity and programs and initiatives and reforms in recent years driving progress and outcomes, and where maybe sometimes despite those programs and initiatives and reforms, we're not seeing progress on the things that matter.
So Eric, let's dive into some of the findings, grades, basically in the report card. First, talk us through the various indicators, the ones you want to highlight, and then tell us about the grades. Is there anything that you noticed that was either a positive or negative change from the past?
Yeah, we have the benefit of looking at trends now because we have done this 3 years. So we have been able to see which indicators are seeing that improvement, and then which indicators aren't necessarily achieving the types of improvement or outcomes that we would want. Before we get into the grades, though, I think it's important to highlight some key themes. And I think one of the key themes, in fact, probably one of the most notable one for this year, is there are some areas that are doing really well, but largely those are the indicators that are being driven by the public sector. So increasingly, we're seeing these kind of two different speeds.
The non-government sector.
The non-government sector.
Okay, the private sector.
The private sector is really moving forward, is really able to like coalesce around like key goals, while the government is operating at what we've become to view as the norm, which is kind of slow and slow progress that just isn't keeping pace with the private sector and keeping pace with where our adversaries are. Some of the key indicators that I think are most important this year are those outcome indicators. When you look at defense modernization, it's not just the investments in science and technology, but are we actually fielding the types of capabilities that our warfighters need to be successful? One that I think we've highlighted many years now is talent. Talent is so critical to not just the government, but the private sector workforce as well. And I think we're noticing, kind of this re-emphasis in not just STEM talent, but actually skilled trades as well. National security isn't all about science and technology, research, engineering. A critical component of that is the manufacturing ability to produce at scale, like our adversaries are. And increasingly, what we're seeing is, the private sector is actually doing a pretty good job of drawing this talent towards the workforce, to work on national security problems. However, it's the government that may not have all of the tools available to bring in the best talent in the time that we actually need it.
So the report lays out these, 10 different areas, right, that you give a grade for. How did you select those 10?
Well, we came up with a framework when we started this project about 3 years ago that we really tried to, again, kind of think about the component parts that you'd see in a healthy, resilient, robust, effective, coordinated national security innovation base. Like, here's where we should really be shining if this system were working. We organized them into inputs and outputs. Eric mentioned the output indicators we think are especially important. You want to get the inputs right, for sure. But if you're getting the inputs right and you're not seeing translation into success and progress in the outputs, then there's a disconnect somewhere. And that's one of the things that we really want to highlight.
I can wrap my head around inputs, sort of simple things like funding, right?
Yeah.
Maybe workforce hiring.
Capital, talent, those are two of our important indicators.
And I can see in my head the data sources like budget documents and hiring documents, things like that. The outputs are what? Programs?
Well, we think of them more conceptually. So we have three output indicators. One, and arguably the most important, is defense modernization broadly. It's really where the rubber meets the road when we talk about this set of issues. Are we able to deliver fielded capabilities into the hands of our warfighters at speed and scale necessary in the context of this competition? That is a low grade. It's actually one of the three lowest grades in the report cards at a D.
And that D translates to fewer programs in procurement and fielding that we would like.
Right. So I think when you talk about kind of programs and procurement, those are the data sets that really underlie the analysis and feed up into that grade. We look at another output indicator around America's innovation leadership more broadly. That's actually one of the best grades in the report card. It's a rare A, an A minus maybe, but in the A range that we give in our analysis, meant to say, look, for all of the headlines that we've seen, especially in the context of China really catching up in native innovation, we still assess that America has the edge in global innovation leadership. But we do assess some vulnerabilities there in a forward-looking sense. But where we are today, things like patents excelling in research globally, that's sort of the data set that goes into that. And then our third output indicator is around what we call pull-through for broader national priorities. So if the system, the NSIB ecosystem, were functioning in this healthy, resilient, effective way, we'd see that it had kind of spillover effects beyond the narrow defense or national security space as well. And we have some ways that we look at that around economic growth, around contributing to US GDP more broadly.
And so a simple version of that is internet,
Correct.
GPS, those kinds of things.
Exactly.
So we're still seeing those kinds of spillovers.
Well, the grade around pull through for broader national priorities is kind of in the mid-range.
Okay.
So we're seeing some of those kind of positive spillover toward broader national priorities, but maybe not as much as we'd have seen in the past or as we'd ideally like to see moving forward.
Okay, but it is a report card.
It is.
And we are talking about the Department of Defense, so there aren't all great grades, as you indicated. So the lowest grades in the report are for things like defense modernization, something you call customer clarity, manufacturing capacity, and talent base, right? This ties into what you're saying, that the private sector does some of those things better than the public sector, than DoD is doing. What, looking at this, keeps DoD from improving its grades in pick one of those areas or all of those areas that keeps these grades from improving?
Yeah, I think it's actually customer clarity, which is probably the most important grade that's impacting the private sector. There are still a lot of barriers to entry from your average, small business or startup being able to engage with the Department of Defense. One is just the speed at which startups operate is not necessarily conducive to the speed at which has become the norm with working for the government. Maybe that's obtaining your facility clearance. Maybe that's getting an authority to operate for your software capability. In some cases, it's waiting for the down select of a program of record or a solicitation that you've applied to. These are still very lengthy processes that don't always, operate at the same timelines.
So customer clarity then is beyond. We always talk these days about demand signal. Right? I don't know what you want to buy, so how can I possibly build it for you? Right? And we talk about how to improve demand signal, and one way of doing it is send another assistant secretary out to give another speech about hypersonics. And does that drive any investment in the private sector? And kind of not really. But you're saying customer clarity's got all these other dimensions to it.
It does. I mean, that is important, right? The rhetoric from the senior leadership from the Department of Defense has to translate in actual opportunities for small businesses to engage. And it's not just DoD, right? Customer clarity also involves Congress as well. The failure to pass an on-time budget obviously impacts non-traditional defense contractors and traditional defense contractors that are trying to work for the Department of Defense. But it is understanding what those problems and national security challenges are. That ultimately falls under that customer clarity bucket.
Right. Because I guess in defense, like every other sector, my sense is the private sector wants some sense of market stability and awareness that they can then have some predictable return on their investments, right?
And the ability to raise additional funding for that startup so they can, scale their technology and get it in the hands of the warfighter.
In terms of talent base, then, what do you think? What keeps the grade from going up in talent base? You touched on earlier, we had previously focused on the STEM-ish part of this talent base, and the solution is we need to produce more PhDs. I think we have a different realization now. Like you said, someone's got to build submarines. Well, let's go have some training opportunities and create this class of people who can actually do something useful for a living. So what else do you think they should be doing in talent base?
I think there's a real opportunity for companies to partner with local universities, community colleges, to create those kind of workforce development pipelines to actually create the workforce that they need to produce the submarines, the unmanned surface vehicles. We're seeing vignettes of where this is kind of occurring. There are companies that are now doing this across the nation, but not nearly at the scale that we need in order to be competitive.
And I'm curious, the urban myth maybe that private capital will only go into software and not into hardware, and therefore doesn't need to do this kind of training of skilled craftsmen, mechanics, machinists. Do you not see that? Do you see it changing now?
I think we're increasingly seeing that's a fallacy, that while software is increasingly important for weapon systems, hardware is kind of having its moment. But they're able to draw talent to those problems now. There's a lot of students that are graduating from community colleges and universities that want to bend metal. They want to be a part of building something that's not just an app.
Right. But just looking at the grade, it's still a C-.
There's room for improvement.
That's a very positive spin on a C-. But the other thing I like about the report is that you admire the problem in some sense, give a real grade based on it's wonderful, but then you propose some remedies here, which is great. And one of the ones that I loved was the idea to address some of these modernization acquisition challenges is something you call unmanned weapon systems as a service contract vehicles. So I thought I had fixed acquisition multiple times over when I was on the Hill, but apparently not. Okay. So what is this unmanned weapon systems as a service contract vehicle idea?
Yeah. So, as we kind of led off with, every year we've done the report card, we have included recommendations. And I think every year of the report card, some of these recommendations have actually been implemented by the department, and in many cases, signed into law and passed via the National Defense Authorization Act. This year, one of the recommendations we are excited about is this unmanned weapon systems as a service kind of contract vehicle. What we're seeing, from conflicts across the globe is the battlefield is really changing every 4 to 6 months, to the point where if you leave, a war zone, 6 months later you return, the technologies that are being utilized, the GPS, the EW degraded environment has just completely shifted, and the requirements and acquisition framework that we've come used to in the DoD is just not fast enough to keep up with those changes. This kind of services idea.
So the traditional process of operational requirement, budget system, creating program of record fighting its way through R&D and then procurement and then training and then into sustainment, just can't keep up.
It can't keep up with the accelerated pace of change on the battlefield.
It sounds so easy when you lay it out like that. It's surprising it doesn't work quicker.
Right.
And you're all too familiar with this from the PPBE Commission.
How we fix that also.
We look forward to many of those recommendations continue to be implemented.
Huh.
However, there is a real opportunity to build off legislation that has been passed. Actually, Section 809 of the FY24 NDIA pilot program for anything as a service kind of looked at consumables and how we can better approach this problem. And I think the important thing to note about unmanned systems is it's not just the physical hardware around it, it's the training that goes into it. It's the testing and evaluation to ensure that system is actually capable of performing how it's intended to in an environment where the EW environment is so degraded. So I think as a services model brings in all of these other elements that are so important, rather than the traditional requirements process where it's going to take 6 to 8 months to define this circular drinking vessel that contains a liquid,
Right.
rather than just saying, I need a cup, right? I need a cup that holds water.
So the as a service part gives you speed. In theory, as a service allows you to spend different kinds of money for it. Am I right in saying we do other things as a service, right? Is it wrong to say we do electricity as a service right now?
Electricity, cloud
as a service. And so you're saying more hardware, more even weapon systems could be done as a service. And this is not completely new, right? We do ISR as a service right now, right?
We do.
Right?
Yeah.
That recommendation then, who pushes back?
We actually haven't had a lot of pushback on that recommendation yet. We've socialized with a number of folks in the DoD, the administration, and on Capitol Hill. I think there's a lot of excitement around it and specifically pursuing it in this year's NDAA.
It does challenge current business models.
Sure does.
Okay, interesting. Because if you live off of selling the drone to the department and then maintaining it, sustaining it for 10 years, this disrupts that kind of business model. And maybe that's what you're trying to get at here.
Maybe that's the intent.
The other thing I like in terms of solving problems with the Hill is that it actually, we found the old FY 2000 NDAA,
Wow.
Section 220, mandates that it's a goal of the armed forces that by 2010, 1/3 of all the aircraft in the operational deep strike force are going to be unmanned. And by 2015, 1/3 of all the operational ground combat vehicles are unmanned. So apparently someone violated the law. Someone should be arrested for that, right? But this as a service might actually creep things into going where even way back then, there was this understanding that we should be using more unmanned systems,
And
robotic systems.
that's another recommendation in this year's report card is, I think we have to flip the script where the status quo when you're developing a new weapon systems is autonomy first, or optionally manned first. That should be the norm. That should be how the new weapon systems are designed. And then if that doesn't fit in a particular use case, then hey, Service Secretary, come back to us and tell us why this isn't a good idea for this specific weapon system.
Right.
But I think oftentimes the human is the limiting factor in the weapon systems that we create. So why are we starting with that human limitation? We need to open ourselves up to autonomy and the significant advancements that have occurred just over the last few years.
Historically, one of the biggest pushbacks on that is culture, right? Between the three of us, you're the one who's actually worn a uniform.
Yeah.
This sort of warrior ethos, pushing back on robotics and autonomous systems. Do you think we've turned a corner on that?
I do. I think, again, conflicts around the world have shown us how important unmanned systems are. You have a forward line. You have doctrinally, you have a forward line of robots. That is something we've never even entertained before, but it's a realization that we are not going to be successful in the next conflict unless we adopt more unmanned systems.
Can I just say too, Arun, I really appreciate the citation of the FY 2000 NDAA. You've got a really crack team of research interns here at NDIA digging up those citations. And I think it just shows like these are not new problems and in some sense not new solutions. One of the reasons that we wanted to do this report card was to say, not we want to add another report to the pile focusing on these issues, but to say, okay, let's actually look at a brass tacks, data-driven, analytical assessment of where we are versus where we need to be and what, initiatives like that over the years, whether it's 25 years ago or 5 years ago, are moving the needle and which are not. And hopefully in a forward-looking sense too, then we can, see these issue sets, for example, have been a major priority for the incoming administration and the new leadership at the department. This provides a baseline assessment. This year's report card provides a baseline assessment of where things were at the start of this current administration, and we'll see where they go from here in terms of implementing exactly these kinds of ideas and new initiatives that we're talking about. New initiatives or old initiatives.
So the comparing our progress is important, the way you're talking about with these metrics, but then comparing to our adversaries is also important. And you do talk a lot about China in the report card. And in a few places, you reference that China has comparative advantage in speed and in especially in production. One of the cases you cite here is shipbuilding. And is there a way that you found in your recommendations or in your findings that we could sort of cut back on China's ability to catch up to us or have a lead on us in some of those kinds of areas?
Yeah, we want to do the report card not as a us versus them assessment, but as us versus where we should be. But an important part of that is where our competitors are. And I was just flipping one of my favorite / least favorite data points from the report card is that Chinese shipbuilding capacity compared to the US is 230x. I mean, just night and day ahead of us in some of these key areas that you mentioned. One of the assumptions that underlies the report card is that we should be leaning into America's strengths, not trying to adopt, even though it has some advantages in the Chinese system, their sort of top-down, centralized approach, but actually it's the free and open dynamism, back to where we started talking about President Reagan's worldview.
Our CEO, David Norquist, always says we're never going to out-central plan China.
Sure. It wouldn't work, and it's not the American way. So how can we think about leaning into our advantages? And I think, to your point, exploiting the disadvantages of our adversaries. One piece of the report card and one of the indicators that we haven't touched on yet is allies and partners. And that, I think, is one of the key Chinese areas of vulnerability and weakness. They don't have allies and partners, right? They have, nations that they work with throughout the world in one way or another, but they're not like-minded countries that are bound by common purpose and mutual interests and values like we have in the United States. And one thing we do in the report card, it is a United States national security innovation-based report card, but we know that the innovative systems of our allies and partners are an important part of our system, and we can be an important part of their systems. And understanding how we can be working more closely and maybe overcoming some of the barriers to doing so with our allies and partners is a way to kind of leverage one of our advantages and get after one of China's strategic weaknesses.
Have you looked at any allied nations? Are they a data source for all of this? Or has anyone asked you to look at how the UK is doing on similar metrics?
We don't. That would be interesting to kind of come up with a report card for other countries or for the America's allies more broadly. There's a lot both under the allies and partners indicators and across some of the other, for example, the talent-based indicator. We talk a lot about what other countries are doing and what we can be doing better to attract talent here from around the world. But no, I wouldn't. I would say, we've looked a lot at progress and new initiatives coming out of NATO. Certainly, AUKUS as a big development in the allies and partners realm, but we haven't looked at particular allied innovation systems themselves.
Yeah. But, those frameworks, you mentioned AUKUS, and I think that's a good example where a lot of the excitement and, honestly, progress has been on the nuclear submarine piece of AUKUS. But I think one of the other pillars that we're most excited about is actually emerging technologies. Do most of the countries that we're collaborating with in the Indo-Pacific, do they need nuclear submarines? No, right? They need small UAS. They need autonomous surface vessels. It's these attritable, scalable systems that actually their manufacturing, their internal manufacturing capacity is probably better suited to maybe take on even than our own.
And if you're in a place which actually has some high op-tempo operations going on, the feedback mechanism that you're getting from the actual use of the systems can feed back to your innovators and your industrial base, and you can cycle through and produce more useful products for actual use because of that tight coupling. And so I think you're saying that these exquisite systems aren't appropriate everywhere. They are appropriate in some places. The other thing on talent, I guess we have an advantage on talent also, right? This is still a place where people want to come to. And our adversaries aren't always places where people want to go to and raise their families and sort of put down their roots. And I don't know you've talked about that in the past, that we can't lose that advantage either.
I'd say in some ways it's a potential advantage on talent that people want to come here. And they do come here especially to study. American universities educate some of the best and brightest from around the world and attract that talent pool here, especially to learn. But where we're falling short, our assessment is in the report card, is with regard to keeping them here to actually work on some of these hardest problems. And one of the recommendations that we've put forward in a couple of previous report cards and emphasized again this year is around creating new pathways for that foreign-born talent who's either here to study to stay or to attract that foreign-born talent here to work on some of these issues. It's something that our allies are actually actively doing to attract those who are educated at American universities but can't stay here to go work in Canada or the UK. Certainly, China has a major program because it's not a natural advantage of theirs, like you mentioned, but they've got a talent attraction program, and it's one way that we've been the benefactor of the brain drain of the rest of the world in the past, but maybe some of the intricacies of our immigration system are not exactly keeping up to continue that trend.
And ETI has done some recent work on this and actually put out a report recently on high skill immigration and its implications for national security. We talked about some authorities that already exist, some ideas that even you worked on, National Security Innovation Pathway, for example, which try to double down on this theoretical advantage that we have in using other people's talent, stealing other people's talent. I want to go back to what you started with, I think, which is this idea that the private sector is doing better in a lot of these innovation areas and on this kind of scorecard than the government, than the public sector. But on the other hand, the government and the large systems integrators, the defense primes, they are necessary to produce the really complex weapon systems, right? As much as I like Silicon Valley, not really good at producing aircraft carrier, nuclear weapon, important deterrent systems. But I guess, you guys have talked about, we are seeing increasing partnerships between traditional government, traditional integrators, and the commercial sector. How would you say that those partnerships are forming? Are they improving over time? Are there other areas that you'd like to see partnerships develop?
Yeah, this is an area I'm actually really excited about because I think we have seen a lot of, I think one of our advisors on the panel called it violent collaboration, right? You have, startups that are choosing either informally or through consortia to work together. You have the mentor protege program that's bringing, more traditional contractors together with smaller businesses. And you have traditional defense contractors partnering with startups, not just here in the US, but internationally as well. You have startups partnering with Korean companies to, in order to produce at scale the types of weapon systems that are being desired. So I think this is an area where I'm particularly optimistic, and you're taking the experience and the knowledge from some of these, some of these primes from working in the defense and aerospace industry for decades, and partnering that with some of these startups that have really cool ideas. They just need a little bit of assistance in the actual production phase.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are different skill sets, right? There's the speed and innovation and disruption skill set. And then there's kind of I know how to developmentally test. I know how to do systems engineering. I know what it takes to train an 18-year-old Marine to use this, which is slightly different than dealing with commercial customers, right? And uploading version 8.1 of the software because it's easy to do. It's hard to do that with a disadvantaged user in the desert, let's say, right?
And it's not just the small businesses and startups that are benefiting from these partnerships. I think the primes are also getting insight into, how startups are approaching these problems from an unconventional way. In some cases, these startups are the ones bringing modern software to test and evaluation, where you have these primes that have used their system for the last 30 years, and it really hasn't evolved at the pace of software.
There's another set of players in the innovation ecosystem for defense especially that I don't know how much you looked at. I'm curious. The government labs, the federally funded research and development centers, the university-affiliated research centers, they're fixtures like the primes almost in what we call our defense innovation base. How do they factor into your report card, and what would you like to see happen with them?
We've actually got a whole indicator on what we call the public or civil innovation base. And it's one where I'd say the grade is kind of in that middle range. It's a C, so not the greatest vulnerability that we're trying to call attention to, but room for improvement, particularly around demonstrating the return on investment for the R&D dollars that are going into those FFRDCs, UARCs, and the like.
On the output side, like you tied
Correct.
back earlier.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. So a gentleman's C, which I suppose you can survive forever. That's why they call it a gentleman's C, right? You can survive forever.
A gentleman's C.
Right.
I think there's a lot of opportunity, though, to ensure those kind of exquisite organizations are focused on the appropriate problems, right, and not, either duplicating what's being done in the commercial sector, but truly performing that kind of value add.
So curious, was there anything left on the cutting room floor, like a really good indicator, a really good recommendation that just couldn't fit into the paper that you wish you had room for?
We try to cram it all in. We even added that new indicator around manufacturing capacity and industrial base this year. But there's always ideas that are, I think, kind of percolating for next year, and kind of green shoots of progress that we're seeing, that we're really kind of looking in a forward sense to where they'll go in terms of demonstrating the kind of data and metrics that go into the measurement side of the report card.
And I think one of the most important recommendations that isn't included this year or any year, but it's ensuring implementation of the previous year's report card, so that all the work that goes into producing this over 12 months isn't lost. And as you know, just because something is passed and signed into law doesn't make it so.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
So ensuring that some of the great recommendations from like last year that we're fortunate enough to have champions both in the DoD and on Capitol Hill, ensure that those got passed into law and are now being implemented at the speed and scale that our national security innovation base deserves. Like the recommendation last year on shared commercial classified infrastructure, that kind of we work it for SCIFs continues to be a problem for industry, and we just need the DoD to move a little faster.
So the report came out in March.
Mm-hmm.
And have you had a chance to talk to the Pentagon and to the Hill about this so far?
Yeah, we've been doing a number of briefings across the new administration and Capitol Hill, especially meeting with anyone who's interested in kind of the assessments, again, sort of the assessment of the ecosystem overall, but particularly some of those recommendations for how to improve.
And if NEIM members want to get a hold of the report, where should they go?
ReaganFoundation.org/NSIB will take you there.
Okay, we'll drop that into the text box,
Great.
The link. And if they're interested in supporting you and trying to get these ideas out there, what would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we produce the report card to be useful to people like NDIA, ETI, and your audience. And so, whether it's referencing it in things that they're writing, using it on the congressional side in an oversight role, using it in terms of those in the private sector who are trying to break into this space, as a data point for some of those barriers, and maybe also a champion for some of the successes that we've seen. And I should say too, we're always interested in input. If there are things that we're missing, like I said, we added a new indicator this year. We always want to make sure that we're evolving the policy product of the report card as the conversation around this set of issues evolves. And so we're always open to input if there are things that we're missing or not captuing in our research.
And people can go right to you?
People
with that
can, sure.
Yeah.
I'm on the Reagan Foundation website.
Is it fair to say that you're already working on next year's?
In some ways, when we brief out the 25 report card, we get a lot of input from key stakeholders across the ecosystem. We begin in earnest, I would say, in the fall. It's all told probably a 6-month project, and kudos, especially to Eric, who helps out with this project, not a full-time member of the Reagan Institute team. And also we work with McKinsey and Company, who are knowledge partners, and a really amazing team of analysts that supports the research foundation and analytical data that underlie the grades.
So that's great. Rachel Hoff is with the Reagan Institute, and Eric Snelgrove with Revere Federal Strategies. They both were key authors to, and I'll open this up again if I can, there it is, the National Security Innovation-Based Report Card. We just scratched the surface. There's so much more in here. Please take a look at it and reach out to Rachel if you've got ideas for next year. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Eric, for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, Arun.
Thank you.
With that, I want to thank everyone for listening to another episode of Emerging Tech Horizons. Remind you all to visit ETI's website to sign up for our mailing list and register for our various webinars, events, and educational offerings, including our Tech 101 series. Please visit our YouTube channel, that's at Emerging Tech ETI, to see all of our past podcasts, webinars, and our other content. We are excited to announce that the website for the third NDIA Emerging Technologies for Defense Conference and Exhibition, which is going to be held August 27th through 29th at the DC Convention Center. The website's now up. That's www.ndiatechexpo.org. For the conference, we're working with a number of organizations within the Department of Defense, including OSD, the CDAOs, the services, UCOM, AFRICOM, and other COCOMs, and we're putting together, again, like previous years, keynote sessions, breakout panels, technical presentations, speed dating sessions, demonstrations, a hackathon that's going to allow you to see the latest administration initiatives and explore partnership opportunities, and also share your great technical innovations with the services, with the defense agencies, and with the new administration leadership, all in the hopes of doing better on our report card next year. Like I said, we're working on a hackathon with the Air Force. We have an exhibit floor. We're going to have networking receptions and speed dating and much more, all of which makes it an event that shouldn't be missed. Agenda and registration information coming soon, ndiatechexpo.org. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to like our episodes and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with all of our latest content. We are available on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcast. A special thank you to Melanie Yu and Daniel Park for producing this podcast. Thanks again for joining us on Emerging Tech Horizons.